Hello and welcome back. I'm Dennis with bestmytest.com, and today we're going to continue our series for the IELTS speaking test. Today's topic is artwork and how to talk about artwork. We're going to talk about how to answer such questions as talk about a painting that you like, or talk about a piece of art that you like, or talk about a traditional piece of art that you like. Let's get started. Okay, let's start by talking about different types of art. The first we got is probably maybe the most common or the most well-known is paintings. And this is when you paint onto a canvas. That's a painting. Now, there's different styles of painting, right? And as through the history of humans, the kinds of paintings that were done have changed a lot. And one very common one is called Cubism. Cubism. Now, it's called Cubism because the things in Cubistic paintings, the people in Cubistic paintings are very square. There's a lot of sharp edges, 90-degree angles, things like that. And this was popularized by Pablo Picasso. Okay, next up, we've got murals. And murals are also a kind of painting, except they are only on walls. That's right. So murals are paintings that are on walls. Now this could be inside your house. You could have a whole wall that's a mural. Or it could be on the street as you walk down your city, you might see a wall of a shop or something that has a mural on it. It's an entire wall that is a painting. That's a mural. And you'll see these across the globe in cities all over the world. All right, next up we got sculptures. Now, sculptures like paintings have changed a lot throughout history. From the Greeks who were making sculptures out of granite and marble of their gods to modern, postmodern art, which is very abstract and without definite form. And I prefer Greek statues, Greek sculptures, because I think they are a testament, an epitome of high quality of skill and art. And I don't really like postmodern because I have a hard time knowing what it is when I'm looking at it. And you'll know if you ever find yourself looking at a sculpture and you scratch in your head and you don't know what it is, it might be a postmodern sculpture. All right, next up is a specific kind of sculpture, and that's a bust. And a bust is a head and usually the upper part of the chest. It could go a little bit lower, but usually goes to about right here. And specifically we have a marble bust, and that's a bust made out of marble. You'll see these in museums and in places, in elegant places where people want to display the finer things in life. So next up we have a portrait. And a portrait is another kind of painting. And a portrait is just a painting of a person. It's a painting of a person. Now in modern times, a portrait could also be a photo. You can go have a portrait made with your family, and that would be a photo. So it's a painting or a photo. Okay, and next up we have calligraphy. And calligraphy just means an artistic style of writing. And you see this a lot in East Asia, in China or Taiwan or Hong Kong, where they have these character languages, and people paint the characters in a very elegant and graceful way. And you'll see these in Asia, you'll see these a lot on people's walls or in places of business to decorate where they stay. So it's a stylish writing. Okay, the next one is not really a type of art. It's a term that can be used for all kinds of art, including music actually, and that's masterpiece. Now a masterpiece is kind of just what it says. It is a masterpiece of art. And this is sort of the culmination, the peak of an artist's work. So Beethoven's masterpiece was maybe the Ninth Symphony. And that was after him learning and getting better and better and better, he made this symphony that was just the best. It was the masterpiece. So artists who make a profession as artists, they will all have a masterpiece. And we also use this kind of in everyday vernacular to talk about something that we really like. It's like, oh man, did you see that, that painting my child did? It was a masterpiece, right? It's not really a masterpiece, but it's just a way to talk about how much you like something or how much you like a piece of art. All right, now that we've covered the types of art, I'd like to talk about words and phrases that you can use on the IELTS speaking test to talk about artwork, to describe artwork. Let's have a look. So the first is aesthetic. Aesthetic. Now, aesthetic means related to beauty. So you might say that painting created an aesthetic pleasure for me. And that means just a pleasure related to beauty. There's another way to use aesthetic in terms of art, and that's to talk about a certain school of art like Cubism or abstract or postmodern. All of those schools have their own principles. They have their own aesthetics. So here you can use principles and aesthetics. They're synonyms. So you might say a Cubist aesthetic or a postmodern aesthetic. And that's the set of principles that characterize that kind of artwork. So the next one is vivid. And this is a very good word to use. It is something you'll use a lot in paintings. And it means that when something has a very bright color or a very striking contrast, something that jumps out at you, it's very vivid. So if you're at the museum and you see a painting that you like, maybe it's an abstract painting with all different colors, and you might say those vivid colors really evoke a feeling of nostalgia, for example. So vivid means colors that are very bright, very striking, and really catch your eye. So the next is elegant. Now we can use this in artwork, but we can also use it in other places, and it means graceful or stylish, right? So graffiti, you know, if you see a mural of graffiti on the wall by your street, it might be beautiful, but it's probably not elegant. Elegant is usually reserved for kind of a higher quality of art, a higher gracefulness of art. So you might say the elegant, looking at the painting of that woman, her elegant dress gave a feeling of sophistication to the piece, for example. Okay, so the next one is restrained. Restrained. And that means holding back a little bit, right? So this is not a word that you use just for artwork. You can say, you know, I have a restrained attitude, and that means I kind of hold myself back. And so a restrained piece of art is the kind of art that you can tell the artist isn't going all for it. They're kind of holding something back. They're kind of being modest in how they present their work or how they made their work. So let's put this into an IELTS question, to an IELTS context. So if you were asked, tell me about a painting that you like, you can answer something like this. Last time I was at the art museum, I found myself surrounded by so many paintings. They gave a very aesthetic atmosphere to the place, and I was really admiring the vivid colors and the elegant paintings of people from all around the world. But one thing that really struck me was how restrained some of the painters seemed to be, as if they didn't want to give away everything at once. All right, let's talk about a couple verbs. The first one is to depict. And to depict means to tell what an artwork is about. To tell what an artwork is about. For example, I could say, yesterday I was at the art museum and I really enjoyed the painting that depicted the struggle between angels and devils in the Bible story. Or I might say, this painting depicts what life was like in the 1920s in rural America, for example. So that's how you use depict. It's pretty simple. Just what is the painting talking about? What is the artwork talking about? And the next means is to evoke. To evoke. And that means to create a feeling inside somebody. That means to create a feeling inside somebody. So painting good artwork definitely should evoke some kind of feeling in you. And so you might be standing at looking at a statue of a Greek god, right? And that might evoke a feeling of strength or a feeling of awe, right? So if you were asked to talk about a sculpture on the IELTS test, you might say, I was standing at the Greek exhibit in the museum and I was looking at the statue of David, and I had this incredible feeling. The statue evoked a feeling of wonder and amazement as I just looked at it for a really long time. All right, so the next is to be characterized by. To be characterized by. Now, we usually use this to talk about schools of art. So, and there's a bunch of them: postmodern, modern, abstract, realism, cubism. But like I said with aesthetic, how each of those schools have their own set of principles. So we can use these, like to be characterized by, to talk about those principles. So for example, Gothic architecture is characterized by very tall spires and very sharp arches, right? If you see a church, if you're in Europe and you see a church with a very sharp arch like that, it's probably Gothic. Why? Because Gothic architecture is characterized by sharp arches. So use that to talk about the principles of a school of art. Okay, so the next is juxtaposition. And you can also turn this into a verb, to be juxtaposed. And that really just means that two things are next to each other, and they're next to each other to create some kind of contrast. Now, a lot of people make the mistake that it's opposites, like black and white, man, woman, that kind of thing. But it's not. Juxtaposed just means that they're next to each other to create a contrast. Now, it could be opposites, but it doesn't have to be opposites. So, for example, you might, if you're talking about a painting that you saw at the art museum, and you might say, I really appreciate the way the artist juxtaposed the dark night sky next to the very light-colored lake. That evoked a feeling of confusion in me, for example. Okay, just a couple more now. So next is brushstroke, and it's what it says it is. It's a stroke of a brush, right? And you can use modifiers, adjectives in front of this to talk about it, like maybe broad brush strokes, and that would just mean that the painter is using a very thick brush and not being very fine with it. Or it could be very fine brush strokes that you can't even see the brush strokes. So that's something specific to paintings. Okay, so the next one is another verb, and that is to epitomize. To epitomize. Now this can also be a noun, and you can say it is an epitome of. An epitome of. So what is an epitome of? What does to epitomize mean? And that just means to be the perfect example of. To be the perfect example of. So I don't know if you've ever been to Spain, but in Spain there's a church called the Sagrada Familia, and it is the epitome of Gothic architecture. It is the epitome of Gothic architecture. It is a marvelous, marvelous cathedral. If you ever get a chance, highly recommend you go there, check that out. Okay, so you can use epitomize and epitome in your daily life. You don't have to reserve it for artwork. So yeah, it's a very good word to use. It really ups your vocabulary to the next level. All right, last but not least is contemporary. And contemporary can be an adjective or a noun. As an adjective, it just means something that is of the present time, of recent times. So you might say that Jackson Pollock is a contemporary artist. And that just means he's of this recent period of time. But as a noun, it means that two things happened at the same time, or two artists were making art at the same time. So for example, you could talk about, I really appreciate Pablo Picasso and Salvador Dali. And I really enjoyed both their paintings, and then I was surprised to learn that they were contemporaries. And that just means I was surprised to learn that they worked at the same time and had an influence on each other. So that's what it means to be a contemporary. All right, let's put it into an IELTS context. Let's imagine that you were asked to talk about a sculpture that you saw and enjoyed. You might answer something like this. The other day, I was walking through the park and I saw a contemporary sculpture. I think it was postmodern. I'm not sure, but it really evoked a feeling of nostalgia inside me. And the best part of it was the juxtaposition of the metal of the sculpture with the grass and the greenery all around it. That really added a contrast that I found enjoyable. And I really think it was an epitome of how society should build cities so that they're both functional and beautiful. Okay, I want to share with you a couple key phrases that will help you talk about paintings or photographs in a much more intelligent way. So the first is in the foreground, and then in the background. So foreground, background, what does that mean? Well, a lot of paintings depict a three-dimensional space. They show a three-dimensional space. So in the foreground just means what's closest to the viewer. So right now I'm in the foreground. And the whiteboard is in the background. Right? So in the foreground means what is closest to the viewer, and in the background means that thing that is farther away from the viewer. And you can use this for paintings or for, photographs. The next phrase is to be prominent in the, now here I got artwork, because you can say sculpture, you can say painting, you can say mural, you can even say symphony. You can apply it to music as well. And to be prominent in, it just means the most noticeable, the most important part of that artwork. Let me give you an example. So let's suppose that you were asked the question, what's your favorite painting and why do you like it? Well, I might answer something like, my favorite painting is The Last Supper. And I really like it because you can see very clearly in the foreground, you can see the table with the 12 disciples, and Jesus is very prominent in the center of the painting. But also, what I really like about it is that in the background, you can see very interesting details about what life was like back then. That's why I like The Last Supper. All right, I just got a few more words that I want to talk to you about paintings. And the reason we're talking so much about paintings is because that's the most common kind of art. It's the kind you're going to be talking about the most and you'll probably be asked about the most. So, the first is palette. So a palette means two things. It means the board that the painter holds, and it's kind of, they hold it in their hand like that, and it's a big shape like that, and they put the paint on it. That's a palette. But a palette is also the range of colors that an artist might have on the board. So maybe the artist has a bunch of blues, some grays, and some blacks. That would be his palette for that painting. So the palette is actually the thing the paint is on, and it's the range of colors that the artist uses. The next is canvas, and that is just the material that is used to paint on, right? And you can find them, they could be framed, they could be on a wooden frame, or they could just be rolled up. You can get canvas in a few different ways. But paintings happen usually on canvases. And brush stroke, we already covered. It can be a fine brush stroke, it can be a broad brush stroke. Now there's a couple other words I want to add here, and this is oil, acrylic, and watercolor. And these are just the basic, these are the three major kinds of paint that a painter uses. Maybe they use oil paint, or acrylic paint, or watercolor paint. And as you become more experienced in talking about paint, you'll be able to notice the difference and notice which one is which. All right, that's our lesson for today about artwork. We talked about types of art. We talked about vocabulary that you can use to describe art. For more IELTS speaking questions, please visit our website at bestmytest.com. All right, and I'll see you guys in the next one.